People often assume family favoritism announces itself loudly. They imagine obvious cruelty, open rejection, clear villains. That wasn't how it looked in our family, looking back. I think that's why it lasted so long. The reunion happened on a warm July afternoon in a public park. There were folding chairs under rented tents, children chasing each other across the grass, and enough food to feed twice the number of people who attended. By every visible measure, it was a happy gathering. Years later, it is still the reunion I remember most clearly. Not because of what happened, because of what finally became visible. My brother arrived late. That wasn't unusual. He had recently left another job, his third in 4 years, and was trying to start a new business that, at the time, existed mostly as conversations and possibilities. When he walked across the park, my mother's face immediately brightened. "There he is," she said. Relatives smiled, questions followed. How was the business idea? What were his plans? What came next? For nearly 30 minutes, the discussion revolved around future potential. Not accomplishments, potential. Nobody seemed to notice the distinction. I did, mostly because I had spent much of my life living on the other side of it. By then, I had built a stable career, purchased a home, and completed a professional certification that had taken years of work. None of those things felt extraordinary to me. They were simply parts of my life still. They had required effort, sacrifice, patience, the kinds of achievements that accumulate quietly. Eventually, an aunt asked how work was going. Before I could answer, my mother smiled. "Oh, he's doing fine." Fine. That was the entire summary. The conversation moved on almost immediately. A few minutes later, she returned to discussing my brother. Plans. Not results. Plans. At the time, I didn't feel angry. What I felt was something more complicated. Recognition. The kind that comes when a familiar pattern repeats itself so many times, you can predict it before it happens. As the afternoon continued, memories kept surfacing. School awards that received polite nods, promotions that generated brief congratulations, achievements that quickly became expectations. Meanwhile, my brother's setbacks were often framed as evidence of resilience. His struggles became stories. Mine became assumptions. People assumed I would be fine. And perhaps because of that, nobody spent much time asking whether I was. The strange thing was that I loved my brother. I still do. He wasn't responsible for the dynamic. He benefited from it, certainly, but he didn't create it. Family roles are rarely assigned by one person alone. They evolve. They settle into place. Eventually, everyone learns their lines. Late in the afternoon, several relatives gathered around the picnic tables near the lake. Conversations turned reflective. Stories about grandparents emerged. Then someone asked what made our family so close, despite living in different states. An elderly relative named Walter answered. Walter had known our family longer than almost anyone present. He had attended birthdays, weddings, funerals, and holidays, stretching back decades. When Walter spoke, people listened. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. Honestly, I think this family survived because some people never stopped showing up. Several heads nodded. Walter continued. Your mother always worried about your brother. A few people laughed softly. Nothing wrong with that. Parents worry. My mother smiled. Then Walter looked toward me. But I always thought she worried so much about him because she never had to worry about you. The table became quiet. Not uncomfortable, just attentive. Walter wasn't criticizing anyone. He was remembering. I watched you spend 30 years doing exactly what you said you would do. He shrugged. Sometimes reliable people become invisible. No one interrupted him. I've seen this family celebrate your brother's attempts. A small smile crossed his face. And I've watched them quietly depend on your results. The silence deepened around the table. People seemed to be revisiting old memories, connecting dots, looking at familiar relationships differently for the first time. All afternoon, nobody rushed to fill the space. My mother lowered her eyes, not defensively, thoughtfully.
Walter wasn't accusing her. That was what made the moment powerful. He was simply describing something. He had witnessed something many people had accepted without examining. My brother looked toward me, then toward our mother. His expression carried the same realization spreading around the table. The dynamic suddenly seemed visible, not because it was new, because someone had finally named it. The conversation moved on. Eventually, people refilled drinks. Children continued playing. The reunion didn't end with apologies or dramatic confrontations. Real families rarely work that way. But something shifted that evening. As people packed chairs and folded tables, my mother walked beside me toward the parking lot. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "I never meant for you to feel overlooked." It wasn't a complete resolution. It wasn't a confession. It was simply the most honest thing she could offer in that moment. Years later, I still think about that reunion. Not because favoritism disappeared afterward. Some habits are built over decades. They don't vanish in a single afternoon. But from that day forward, the pattern became harder to ignore. Once people saw it, they couldn't completely unsee it. And sometimes that is where change begins. Not with confrontation, not with victory, but with the uncomfortable moment when a family finally recognizes the story it has been telling itself all along.